Timnit, all yours. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So the backstory is of this, the talk I'm going to give is that it's a part of a 3-part tutorial. Oh, hey, Dave Held, I see you. Hi, sorry. Part of a 3-part tutorial that Emily Denton and I gave at CVPR in June, about 2 months ago. And this is the first part. So the first part, we started with computer vision, who benefits and who is harmed. The second part of this tutorial was on data ethics, and the third part was on suggestions on how to move forward. So I thought I'd start with this one because it's a very timely one, because there is a backstory to this tutorial. It was very dramatic for us to give it. It was during all these protests, our friends were being arrested. We were barely able to even function on the days where we were supposed to be uploading the tutorial. So it was kind of like, we did our best, but it was just we were not in a position to give talks at the time. But I wanted to give this talk just because I thought it was kind of timely with some of the things that are going on. Okay, so one of the things that we did is we had a guest lecture at Stanford too in a computer vision class that I actually used to TA, and we asked students, where do you think this technology is being used for most today? This technology being computer vision. So what are the areas in which, what does the landscape look like in terms of industry, right? What are the areas in which it's being used for most today? So I actually don't know the answer to this question. And we thought it would be interesting for students. So when we asked them about, a lot of people said personal convenience, like sorting photos and stuff like that, self-driving cars, assistive technologies. There is some policing and military somewhere here, but I don't know why it's not shown up. Healthcare. And so then we asked, where do you think the greatest positive potential for computer vision technology lies? And then a lot of people said healthcare, self-driving cars, assistive technologies. And then we said, where do you think the greatest negative potential of computer vision technology lies? A lot of people said kind of policing and military, which it doesn't appear in the legend here. Some people said, I think this is self-driving cars or healthcare. So this was to do kind of, in order to show people that, maybe what's happening in the industry doesn't align with our hopes and dreams, or maybe it does, but we are not really thinking about that, right? We should sort of have a little bit of an understanding of probably what the landscape looks like. So for when you're thinking about the future of some technology, right? Whether it's a bright future or dark future or something, it completely depends on the point of view of the person that's imagining this future, right? So Ruha Benjamin had this talk that I highly recommend. It was a keynote at iClear called Reimagining the Future of Technology. And she talks about some of the things she covers in her talk and her book, Race After Technology, as well. And I guess there's a class that's offered with the School of with computer science this fall, which unfortunately I would have loved to audit it. But so as an example of this, so here is an example of someone imagining a future, right? So this is James Landay. He's a HCI professor at Stanford, and he says, imagine for a moment that imagine for a moment that you're in an office hard at work, but it's no ordinary office. By observing cues like your posture, tone of voice, breathing patterns, it can sense your mood and tailor the lighting and sound accordingly. Through gradual ambient shifts, the space around you can take the edge off when you're stressed or boost your creativity when you hit a lull. Imagine further that you're a designer using tools with equally perceptive abilities. At each step in the process, they riff on your ideas based on their knowledge of your own creative persona, contrasted with features from the best work of others. So this is kind of like imagining a very nice future where, a future where there's a room full of sensors, and the sensors can be lights and motion sensors, light sensors, all sorts of things, and they change according to your needs, right? When you feel tired, they probably kind of, when you feel stressed, your environment kind of adjusts to you so that you don't feel stressed anymore. It tries to boost your creativity when you hit a lull. It kind of tries to improve your collaboration with other people. So this is an ambient environment that's been designed according to your needs, right? And then for the same kind of environment with sensors, this guy has another kind of future that he's imagining. So this is from Ali Al-Khatib, who used to be an HCI student at Stanford, but was an anthropologist by training before that. So Ali Al-Khatib says, someday you may have to work in an office where the lights are carefully programmed and tested by your employer to hack your body's natural production of melatonin through the use of blue light, eking out every drop of energy you have while you're on the clock, leaving you physically and emotionally drained when you leave work. Your eye movements may someday come under the scrutiny of algorithms unknown to you that classifies you in dimensions such as narcissism and psychopathy, determining your career and indeed your life prospects. So again, this like the same future that's being reimagined very differently. I mean, not the same future, but the same, technology, the same setup that's being imagined by two different people in very different ways. So you might ask, why do these two different people have such different understandings of what this future is going to be like, right? So Ali Al-Khatib is an Iraqi American. I think he's used to persecution, and he's used to his environment trying to eke out something out of him, not the other way around, right? And James, I would say, I'm just making an assumption. I think, when he's thinking of a future, he's thinking of an environment that is kind of changing according to his needs, rather than an environment that is actually persecuting him. So when we're working in our science and our careers, I guess this is a point we make in the third part of the tutorial, but I kind of want to make it here too, because I don't talk about it later. It's very important to take it into account what that point of view is. So we all have a point of view. And for some reason we have learned, well, not for some reason, feminist studies have critiqued this idea of the view from nowhere that we learn about in science as if it's objective. It's no one's view. It's just this objective truth that we're seeking out, science and engineering. Whereas in a lot of our work, actually computer science, computer vision is a very social discipline. It's dealing a lot with people. Many of the questions are about people, and it's affecting a lot of people. So we shouldn't kind of think about this discipline as a discipline that is being studied from the view from nowhere. So we should examine which view we're studying from. So Ali talks about here being scrutinized, and also being classified on dimensions such as narcissism, etc. So there are startups that are doing this still, and so here's one example that's called Faceception, and it talks about how just from someone's image, they try to do personality profiling, and then they try to determine whether someone has a high IQ, whether they're a white-collar offender, or whether a terrorist, etc. And there's so many things to talk about here, but one is, like when we're talking about the view, you notice how a lot of these places, they're trying to appeal to the employer, right? They're always trying to appeal, to align themselves with an entity that has more power. So they're not trying to appeal to the employees, the people who are trying to find a job, who are being screened. They're appealing to the employers, and they're saying, hey, it's very hard to find, like we can do it in an automated way without kind of you hiring additional people to do this. We can screen people for you, and we can decide whether these people have high IQ, whether they're a white collar offender or whether they're a terrorist. So every time we see stuff like this, we should ask, does this pass the smell test? And in my team right now at Google, and our team, the ethical AI team, there is a project called the Data Genealogies Project. That's a multi-year research agenda that's being led by Emily Denton and Alex Hanna. So Emily used to do, I think is more well known for working on generative models, but she's kind of, I think, changing her direction now. And Alex Hanna is a social scientist who is very interested in critically analyzing data. So they are analyzing all the data sets that have been put out in computer vision venues, like, CVPR and ICCV, CCV, all these places, and starting to analyze what kinds of things they're purporting to do, like what kinds of tasks they're purporting to work on. And I'm looking forward to some of their papers that are coming out, but I think you would be a little bit surprised that these kinds of things that I'm talking about here, they're not just coming randomly, they're also happening in the research community and in the venues that are considered to be top tier publication venues. So in general, for me, I object to anything that purports that it can infer someone's internal state, like happiness, right? You can see whether someone's smiling maybe or not, but you can't purport to infer whether someone is happy or not. That leads to a whole bunch of other issues that I guess I'm not really going to cover here. There's also issues of IQ. Who created the IQ test? What's the history of the IQ test? Who is it imagining to be quote unquote intelligent? Like, what's the conception of intelligence? So kind of codifying this kind of historical issues into these types of algorithms and models now at scale is something that worries me. And of course, terrorists, when you look at someone who's going to be branded as a terrorist or not. So this is a lot of people, for Faceception is kind of branded as they advertise themselves a lot as hiring tools too. And so another one is HireVue. This company loves me because I always give them as an example. And I'm actually curious because every single time I talk about HireVue, there's someone in the audience who has had a job interview through HireVue. And I don't know if I can see, but it'd be interesting to see if people could raise their hand, like if they have been in HireVue, if they have had a job interview through HireVue. I can't see everybody, but
there's one person.
Oh,
two actually.
Two. Could one of you, maybe Bridge Patel? I'm saying your name terribly, probably. I'm butchering your name.
You're saying perfectly.
Did you say your name?
Bridge Patel. You said it.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, can you tell us your experience?
Yeah, it was just a basic experience. Like, I guess like they would present me with a question and then I had like a few seconds to prepare an answer. It was a behavioral interview and then they would record me giving my answer. I was just in my room and all that stuff alone, but it was just like being recorded a behavioral answer.
Like, what was like an example of the question?
It was like, I think it was like, what do others think of you and how do you know they think of you that way?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I want to know, did you know that they use, emotion detection to analyze your video?
No, I didn't. No,
Okay, so you probably just knew that they would record, and so this is the point I want to make. So there's this company called HireVue, and it's spreading like wildfire, right? Like when I first heard about them, they had a few clients. Still, it was a lot, and then it just grew. I think they're used in so many places. I know they're used at least by the government of the UAE. They're used by all sorts of nonprofits. They're used by Nike, IBM, I mean, all sorts of companies, right? And what they do is instead of, people, instead of when you apply for a job, I mean, when many people apply for a job, instead of having recruiters sift through lots and lots of resumes, they have this automated tool that sifts through those resumes and determines who should be hired for an interview. But I think the thing that they're really, really advertising now is this tool that records you when you're interviewing, right? So now, instead of you kind of interviewing face-to-face with someone, they have a set of questions, they record your answers, and they, and in addition to analyzing your voice and whatever else they're doing, they also perform emotion recognition, emotion detection on you, and then they say they give quote-unquote verbal and nonverbal cues to the employer so that they can make that decision about you. This thing really scares me. Imagine, you know, if there's some sort of glitch, right? It's not like you just didn't get that one job. It's that you didn't get any job anywhere for whatever, any profession. And what worries me is that we don't really know. They said that they're working with a third-party auditor to get audited. I don't know who it is, but we don't really know. We can't really query it. I have friends who are researchers like Nilufar Salaheza, a professor at Berkeley, who said that she's been trying to audit their model and it's been very hard for her to get information about them. But we just don't know, you know, what it's doing, how it's working, and I didn't even know that they were doing emotion detection, except we were on some panel together with the founder of Affective, I forgot her name, and so she said that they were using them. So this is just one example. Another example is face surveillance, and I'm just saying face surveillance because I want to talk about a specific application of face-related technology, right? There's face detection, face recognition, face verification, face, you know, identification. So surveillance. This example talks about how Maryland has a very extensive face surveillance system. So this, as an example here, talks about how in the Freddie Gray protests, face recognition was used by police to identify protesters, and then what they did was they matched the protesters to their social media profiles, and they would find the people who had arrests, who had warrants, and then they would target them for arrests, right? And so right now, during this time, a lot of people were saying not to post pictures of protesters online, because, you know, so that they're not further persecuted. But then there was this person, oh, I don't have it here, but I can look for it later, who came up with, who used face detection to kind of cover the faces of protesters. So before you upload a picture online, you would kind of process it through a website or something, and then it would cover all of the faces of the protesters, and then you could put it up online. So that was a kind of an interesting flipped use of let's say, face detection. There was somebody, I don't know if they're in the audience, but there was somebody who emailed me on Saturday. Is it Priya? I don't know if you want to speak, if you're in the audience, who was asking me, who was telling me that there is a proposal to curb the use of face surveillance in Pittsburgh. And they were asking me if I could talk a little bit more about that. So I don't know if they're here. If you're
She's here in the audience.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
here.
Could you talk about it? Could you talk a little bit about it?
Absolutely, yeah. So this week, Councilman O'Connor and Councilperson Strasburger are co-sponsoring a bill to regulate the use of predictive policing and facial recognition in Pittsburgh. The idea being that the Department of Public Safety would have to go through a city council approval process ahead of time, and that the approval process would have to find that the particular technology and its particular purpose would not perpetuate bias or have effects on civil liberties. It is meant to be a heavy regulation. It's not quite a ban. but they are seeking public comment on this tomorrow at tomorrow's city council meeting, and it'll be voted on next Tuesday. So I'm happy to send a call script to people who may be interested, basically sort of describing some of these issues that are coming up in the talk today. Thanks, Timnit, for letting me talk about that.
You're welcome. I didn't know about this proposal. I mean, there's so many. I don't keep track of everything that's going on, but I'm glad that finally, you know, that these things are happening, because so I'm not going to talk about predictive policing in the like talk today, but you know, so for example, Christiane Lum and William Isaacs have written about like the issue. They've reverse engineered predpol. For LA, you stopped using this predictive policing tool called predpol, right? And that's because of a lot of people's work. So Christiane Lum and William Isaac had this work showing that they basically reinforce racism. So they, even if you have, you know, equally distributed drug use, for example, in Oakland, predpol would pinpoint, you know, neighborhoods of Black and brown people. And that's because they talk about this thing called the runway feedback. They call it a runway feedback loop, which is, you know, all of these systems are based on who is arrested in the past, who's arrested, not who's committing a crime. Right? And so who's arrested is not necessarily, it's not proportional to who committed the crime. And so then if you train your model that way, and then you go send more police, and then you arrest more people, and of course, if you arrest more people, you're gonna find somebody, right? And then you kind of feed that into your model again, you create this feedback loop. And it's crazy to me that all of these systems have been used without any sort of public debate or education. And I kind of wanted to talk about this project. Well, before that, you know, I think this quote from Mimi Onuha: every data set involving people implies subjects and objects, those who collect and those who make up the collected. It is imperative to remember that on both sides we have human beings. So when we work on our in our field, like I said, first thing to remember is that it's really a social discipline, you know, and so most of the things we're dealing with are people, and but we kind of disappear them into numbers, like Sita talks about later. I'll quote her later. So I wanted to talk about this project called Our Data Buddies. I'm going to go back to full screen. This project, I really like this project because this project is one of the few examples of projects that I've seen where people are aligning themselves with people in marginalized communities, right? Many times, just think back to everything we're doing. You know, when I'm writing my performance review at Google, I'm trying to, you know, impress Google, which is an entity that's like very powerful entity, right? When you're, you know, a faculty and you're writing a grant report or grants, you know, you're trying to improve the government. We don't really, we're many times as researchers not in a position where the people we're trying to serve, the people we're trying to impress, the people who are judging our proposals, the people who are judging whether we get the next funding or not, whether our papers are accepted or not, are actually negatively, the people who are most negatively impacted by these communities, technology. So this project, Our Data Bodies, is a project that first started, so it's a collective of people, a collection of different women who work within their communities. So one of them is Tawana Petty in Detroit, and she's advocating for a ban on face surveillance in Detroit, and it hasn't gotten through yet. But like there was a person who was just wrongfully accused of a crime just a few weeks ago because they they made a mistake using face surveillance. So Our Data Buddies is so Tawana Petty, who is a community organizer, a poet, in Detroit. The first thing she was working on was kind of tech literacy for their community. So she was working on helping people learn how to program and giving them resources, and they had these block parties where they would also bring other people in and all this stuff. And then she immediately learned that actually these communities are being targeted by a lot of technology. And so then they like pivoted to basically teaching them defense against some of these like surveillance that they were being subjected to daily, and like and having them teaching them about surveillance and giving them kind of helping them have more literacy so that they can defend themselves against it. So it flipped. What they were trying to do was flipped, and now they have this community defense playbook and stuff like that. And so Sita Peña-Gangarhan is a Filipino-Indian mother, research justice organizer, born in New Jersey and teaching in London. She's at the, I think, LSE, London School of Economics. And so I really liked her keynote at this workshop towards trustworthy ML, rethinking security and privacy for ML at iClear. And so she talks, here is what she says about abstraction, which relates to Mimi's kind of a quote earlier. She says, the problem with abstraction, I have heard computer scientists present their research in relation to real world problems as if computer scientists and their research is not done in the real world. I listened to papers that tended to disappear people into mathematical equations. And the irony here is that she's actually talking about a conference that was specifically created to work on issues of fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics in computer science and computing. And it was a computing conference that was specifically created to be interdisciplinary. And so that's why she was there, she was involved. But imagine this conference that was created to address these issues in an interdisciplinary manner. She went there and she's talking about the problem with abstraction, because people are still like seeing the problem in such a narrowly defined manner, even though we are trying to work on mitigating the potential harms of these technologies. People are still kind of disappearing people into equations, like she said. And so she says, marginalized people are demonized and deprived. What's the point of making data-driven systems, quote unquote, fairer if they're going to make institutions colder and more punitive? So when you're thinking about something, what does it mean for it to be fair? If the end result is that this task is going to be harmful anyways, what does it mean for it to be fair? Is it going to be just equally harmful to everyone? Is that the goal? So I wanted to give an example like of this from my own past work. So I wrote this paper with Joy Bolamini in 2018, but actually we'd been working on it for long. She had been working on this since like 2015, and the first version of the work was her master's thesis at MIT. When I was a PhD student at Stanford, I advised her at on her master's thesis at MIT, and then we published a portion of those results. And so this work is called Gender Shades, and what we showed was that when you analyze some of these automated facial analysis tools and how well they do, and you break it down by skin type and gender, you see huge disparities in error rates. And so the error rates of, for lighter skinned men are nearly zero, and the error rates for darker skinned women are high, and they go higher and higher. Error rate goes higher and higher as you go darker and darker in skin tone. So here, for example, we see for IBM. So this particular task is gender recognition. So this API, you give it a face, a photo, and it says whether this photo is that of a man or a woman. It just gives you this binary label. And so if you flip a coin and you guess that you'll have 50% error rate. And so when you look at these APIs, the darker and darker the skin type, they were, you can see that the error rates were approaching random chance. And this was back in 2018, right? So a lot has changed since then. So so we had a hunch for why the error rates were higher and higher skin for darker and darker women, because the first thing we wanted to do was analyze the existing data sets and annotate them by skin type and gender, and then do our analysis. But because, you know, people have been working on face related stuff for a long time, so you would assume that, you know, we could use publicly available data to do this. But we found very quickly that these data sets were overwhelmingly lighter skinned and overwhelmingly male, so we had to create our own data set called a pilot parliamentary benchmark of parliamentarians to do this analysis. Anyway, so what happened after this work, right? So there was a lot of work showing that our data sets were heavily skewed. So this is one example. Does object recognition work for everyone from Facebook? And they show that the COCO data set, for example, is heavily skewed, definitely not proportional to the word population, right? Heavily skewed towards Europe and the United States. And then here's this work that also shows how bias in the training data can be amplified. And so here they give an example, I believe, of, yeah, cooking. And so I thought this one was from, okay, Chow and collaborators, I think in Vicente Ordonez's lab. An example from the Does Object Recognition Work for Everyone paper here is, like, they show an example of how, you know, some of these APIs mislabel many items that are not in the Western context. So here you have a soap from Nepal, and it's classified as cheese, bread, cake, or something to do with cooking. Delicious. It does look delicious, but, you know. And then here from the UK, soap is kind of associated with the right things, right? Like toilet design, art, whatever, toiletry. And then here, ground truth is spices in the Philippines, and it's kind of associated with like beer or something like that. And then, but when you see in the US, the spices are actually classified by spices, right? So, and you know, given our training data, given who's represented on the internet versus not, and how we scrape data, etc., it's not hard to imagine that, you know, the data sets that we're using are not representative of everyone. And then, you know, here is another work showing, giving a similar example, like, for example, you know, if you want to classify a wedding, the people on the far right side they're also in a wedding, but they're not classified as such, because the notion of a wedding is a very heteronormative and Western notion that we've encoded. So, I mean, this is not unique to AI, right? So we've had, you know, I wrote about this before, and people have talked about how, for example, in car crashes, they were overwhelmingly killing women and children because cars were just being tested with stereotypically male crash dummies. And similarly, clinical trials were also excluding a lot of, so for example, 8 out of the 10, I believe, drugs that were pulled off the market, it's not that late, it's very recent, like, you know, late 2000s or something, disproportionately affected women. And, you know, right now, a lot of scientists are talking about how people of African descent are being left out of any personalized drugs or the genomic revolution or anything like that, because a lot of these, like the Human Genome Project or many of these other projects, exclude a lot of people of African descent. And I believe only 1% of the genes that they're studying are people of African descent. There's all sorts of issues that, for example, overfitting, right? There's things that they thought were issues just because they didn't look at African genes, but also imagine the next generation of drugs not working on people, that large group of people. So what happened with this work that I'm happy? I mean, there's a number of things I'm happy about. I'm happy about the kind of the various policy changes that are coming up, like the one we just discussed in Pittsburgh. I'm happy about the various bans that are happening. I'm happy about the like you know, kind of people examining these issues. But I do worry that there is something that's happening, which is, and I got into a whole Twitter thing about this, which is that I think people have gotten the memo now that we should diversify our data sets, but that's kind of where the understanding is kind of being limited, in my opinion. So visibility is not inclusion. Just because you have more people, a diversified data set, that doesn't mean we haven't fixed the problem because of that, right? We cannot ignore social and structural problems. So I want to give a few examples here. So for example, as responding to this research, a number of things happened. One is IBM had diversity in the thesis data set, and which they had to take down because when you know, they use Flickr, and when you have Flickr data, when someone puts out their photos on Flickr, they're not assuming that, you know, it's going to be used to train some sort of face recognition model or anything like that, right? Even though a lot of people in computer vision, I mean, this is what we've been doing for a long time, right? We've been using Flickr data, but we haven't been thinking about whether this is actually okay or not. So IBM had to take it down because they were getting sued. And then Google, and I have to say that all of these people are trying to address the problem, right? So IBM thought, oh, okay, like we'll have a data set for the research community to be able to test out their models by various attributes. But now they decided they're not going to pursue this line of work anyways. And that was just very recent, right after all of these protests and all of these things. And then Google was trying to test the camera, right? Like you want to make sure that it works on everyone. But then, so then again, they got the memo that you should have more people of darker skin in your data sets. But then there was this issue where, while they were working with a contractor, and there was this news story about kind of like targeting people of darker skin in a predatory manner to get your data set. And then there is this issue of trans people and trans YouTubers having their videos grabbed to train face recognition software without their consent. So people were like, hey, you know, trans people are not well represented in these data sets, and gender recognition technology doesn't work well on them. So let's just get more of their videos from YouTube to train face recognition software without their consent. And then finally, Microsoft had announced that they closed the gap and the error gap that was shown in our paper by improving gender recognition accuracy. Now, so there was a huge, this is one example where the point was sort of missed. So when we worked on gender shades, there was a number of points we wanted to come across. There are times when, you know, diversifying your data set is a very important thing to do. And so, for example, people have shown that, you know, in a lot of dermatology contexts, people of darker skin are misclassified because all of the teachings, all of the photos, all of the examples that people are shown are of people of lighter skin. And there's even a Twitter account called Brown Skin Matters that I follow. And so in that case, of course, like, for example, you know, that you should aim to diversify your data set. That's really what you need to do. But there are some other cases where, I mean, in all cases, the first thing you should ask is, why is this task even a task? And why does it exist? You know, and what's the end goal? What's the application of it? So many people, so Morgan Klaus here, Morgan Klaus is an intern in our team, and I'm very excited for some of his work that is going to come out pretty soon. But he's a PhD student at Colorado, and so you see Morgan has written a lot about this. Fouad Hamidi, and you know, so they talk about gender recognition or gender reductionism. So they talk about how automatic gender recognition systems are very harmful, especially to the trans community. So these systems should not even exist. There is a lot of issues here. First of all, what are they being used for? A lot of it is advertising. And so should you target someone by their perceived gender, so that you think maybe you want to advertise something that's stereotypically for women to this person, stereotypically for men to this other person. What about misgendering people? How are you even defining gender here? Is it gender? And there's a lot of assumptions about gender, that it's binary, that it's static over time and space, that gender representation doesn't change by culture. There are so many assumptions, and so why is this task even? Does this task even exist? And who is it benefiting and who is it harming? And so this was missed, right? This point was missed. And then in terms of diversifying data sets, right? Again, like there are many attempts to diversify these data sets where they're not really helping the people whose faces are being harvested, right? This is another example of Beijing, of China's face surveillance system that's harvesting African faces, right? But the Africans are definitely not benefiting from this. And then, you know, here, so I said we can't ignore social and structural problems, right? So the same thing is happening in the US, where 1 in 2 American adults is in a law enforcement face recognition database. So this report called the Perpetual Lineup from Claire Garvey, Alvaro Bodea, and James Frankel has been very influential in my work anyways, in 2016. So actually it's very interesting. When they came up with this report in 2016, they were asking for a moratorium. Not for a moratorium, sorry. They were asking for regulation on face surveillance. But actually later on, when they came up with this report in 2019, which showed all sorts of misuses of this technology, they asked for actually a moratorium instead. So here's one example where when police are trying to use it to get leads for suspects, leads for like a crime, so this example, they were like, oh, I think the guy looks like Woody Harrelson, who's a famous actor. So why don't we like get a picture of Woody Harrelson? We could Photoshop his eyes and put it in the system. It'll give us nearest neighbors, and you know, then we can, you know, try to get leads from that. And so this shows you that, like, when you're, you know, STS people, Science, Technology, and Society people talk about socio-technical systems, right? So in our team, we say we're a socio-technical research team, which means we're not looking at technology. We shouldn't look at technology just as this kind of tool without context. When you think of technology, you have to think about it in a system that it's in, right? So which is everywhere from the people building the technology and how it's being used, the associated documentation and instructions, the geopolitical situation that it's being placed in. So finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about face recognition, because people keep on asking me, like, why do I care about face recognition? People recognize faces. Why do we care that, you know, computers recognize faces? And I used to think that way, which is, you know, like, honestly, like 4 years ago or so, I didn't think very much about face recognition. It was not a thing I was thinking about. It was not a thing I cared about. It was just because I was starting to work with Joy. And even when I started working with Joy, surveillance aspect was not really the aspect that I was thinking about. I had to learn a lot from her, from the other people in the community who were teaching us about the implications of some of this technology. But here's an example from, so I wrote this paper with a historian, Unso Zhou. She's a history PhD student at Stanford. And she pointed me to this clip from Life magazine in 1940 or something like that, I don't remember. This one is showing people, instructing people how to differentiate between Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans, because, you know, they should target Japanese Americans and do whatever to them, but not Chinese Americans, right? And so what does technology do? Technology just amplifies our intent. If this is our intent, this is what we're gonna do at scale, right? So right now, we know that in China, Muslim minorities are being identified in this way at scale. And we don't have to go to China, right? I always kind of get annoyed when people look to China. There's plenty of stuff happening here in the United States. So here's an example where Amazon was pushing face recognition, was selling, of course, their system recognition to police. And now they said they're going to stop for at least for 1 year, but who knows what's going to happen after that. And I want to say structurally, like, who are the people? So this is a picture of iClear 2017, I think, or 2016, I don't remember. You know, and who are the people selling, working on this technology, right? Who are the people building the technology? Who are the people who work at Amazon? This is a picture, and I don't see anybody who looks like the people who are negatively impacted by this technology in the US, right? I don't see, you know, Black people. I don't see women, really. And so we can't ignore this kind of social and structural issues when we're trying to work on these issues. So the reason I brought this up is because the person pictured here, Deb, she was walking into rooms like this feeling very isolated and thought that, and she was just going to drop out really of this whole field until she found Black in AI, which is a group that I co-founded with my colleague Reddy.Bebe. And so Deb, it was very important that Deb stayed in this field because she wrote this paper showing that follow-up paper to Gender Shades called Actionable Auditing. One of the things it did is that it showed that Amazon's recognition system that they were selling to police may have similar biases that we showed in Gender Shades. And they did not like this paper. VP after VP was like coming out and you know, trying to discredit the technical merits of this paper. And my co-lead Meg Mitchell and I had to assemble a whole letter debunking some of the criticisms that the VPs had, and we assembled a whole bunch of scientists to sign this letter, and it was kind of all over the press and stuff. And so we had to come out and support them. So it's very important for people like Deb to be here and have support, you know, because people like her kind of take they care about, you know, making an impact and kind of removing the harms that these technologies could have in their own communities, right? She's not just thinking about another paper or another tenure or whatever. She's like literally putting her work and name on the line and being attacked by VPs of large companies. And as an undergrad, she was an undergrad when she wrote this paper. So finally, there's now, okay, so I talked about diversifying data sets, so people have gotten that memo. People have also gotten the memo that that you should have ethics boards. We should think about ethics. You know, I hear ethics all the time. But the problem again is that whenever we're doing this, if we don't include the people who are most likely to be negatively impacted by the technology, then however many, you know, ethics boards we have or other ethics things we do, I don't think are going to make any much of a difference at all. Finally, I thought this was a great example of, you know, so Sita in her talk and discusses refusal. So people practicing refusal. So she says that, you know, one of the things people do is they refuse to engage with the technology. So like if you build it, at some point, some people might like come up with some interesting ways to refuse to engage with the technology. So, here's some examples, like people have fashion that fools face recognition, or some makeup. And I actually remember listening to a talk too at the same workshop as Sita from CMU, talking about how they were like working on creating these glasses, like 3D glasses that would full face recognition too, which I thought was like very interesting research. I'll stop there, and I guess we don't have that much time, but I can take questions if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Timnit. Maybe people can raise their hands and then we can unmute them. Questions?
I can't see actually, so I'm trying to figure out how to see.
So if you click on participants.
Oh, okay, there's 105 people.
Yeah.
If anybody has a question, you can either write it on chat or, oh, somebody.
Yes, Anjali.
Anjali Field.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot for your talk. I liked it a lot. one thing I wanted to ask was, you gave a couple examples that I thought were really striking about places where companies try to address ethical problems or bias and end up sort of making them worse. Do you have any suggestions of better ways to address those types of issues that aren't going to have the kind of backfiring that you showed?
That aren't going to have the kind of what?
That aren't going to end up making the problem worse.
Yeah, I really think, people talk about participatory design. So Deb actually had co-organized a workshop called, I think it was Participatory Approaches to Machine Learning at ICML. So those kinds of, I think participatory design, which seek to include people from many different communities, especially the people who are most impacted by technology. That is what I would first and foremost think. So a lot of times, in my opinion, things are simple, right? Like it's as simple as just passing the mic or letting the other person do something rather than you doing it for them, or just giving them power, like, or listening to them or bringing them to the table. So when I say things are simple, let me give you an example. I was at this UN AI for Social Good conference in Geneva. And someone asked me a similar question, like, what can we do to, like, have more participants and all that? And I was like, okay, so look at the talks that we just had. The German guy, head of the Red Cross, is talking about Somalia. This other guy, I think Swiss guy, talking about his work in Nigeria, and we're in Geneva. The most expensive city does not give visas to Africans. The Somalians cannot be here to talk about their issues. We're not hearing from Somalians who are working on Somalian problems. We're hearing from other people who are like talking about their, you know what I mean? So for me, it was that simple. So I said, okay, if we're gonna do this, the thing I would say is don't have this conference in Geneva, because the people you're talking about are not gonna be able to come here. It's too expensive. They don't even get visas. And have the people who are doing their own, work, kind of have them talk about like how they're addressing issues in their own community, right? So this is what I mean. Like sometimes, it's just a matter of process, right? But a lot of people, I feel it's hard for them to just give up that, I don't know, like that I want to save this group of people kind of mentality. Many times it's just kind of giving, giving that group of people a visibility. I don't know if I answered your question.
Other questions? We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there anyone? Okay, Jonathan, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you for like raising a lot of these issues. And I think one of the things that you brought up really early on that I'm sort of curious if you want to expand on is this sort of double-sided nature of these technologies. As you said, on the one hand, we really, all of us who were at protests immediately stopped taking photos when we realized that there was this problem, that if we posted these photos, this was going to lead to issues. On the other hand, I've also heard some discussion about human rights groups wanting to have these kinds of photos. They can identify, for instance, officers who are doing things that are problematic. And so it's the same underlying technology.
Yeah.
And so I basically find myself in this kind of like, well, I don't know what to do. Like I know, like I want to protect the right people, and I want to, should we not? I don't know but basically that's the question. I don't know.
I mean, it's a difficult one because I can't, I don't know how to answer the question, because personally, like I developed my intuition about it after talking to a lot of different kinds of people. And before that, I just don't know. So for example, things like a bomb, I know a bomb is it's a bomb, right? Things like face recognition, it's harder. I think it's harder because it does inherently, it's like, it's recognized, seeing a face, and it's only when you're not well that people can't recognize 6 billion faces and track them and, and link them to memory and stuff. And so, and then people ask me things like, what about using it for child trafficking purposes or something, identifying? I guess my answer is like, I have not seen people who are activists in child trafficking issues advocating for its use. You know what I mean? And then another thing I hear is also, someone actually, Haben Girma just emailed me. She's the first deaf-blind person to graduate from law school, from Harvard Law School. And she has, I'm plugging her book. I love her book. She has an autobiography. So I'll just write Haben Girma. And so she asked me, she said, hey, have you ever had the situation where people use people with disabilities to advocate for technology that might be racist? So for example, she's like, maybe people could say that, like, face recognition could be useful for blind people. And so have you ever had that kind of situation where people say that to like advocate, for its use? And I was like, yes, but it's never the blind people. I told her it's never the blind people saying this, right? Or the people advocating for that. So I guess for me, like, I don't really have an answer to it, but I would say it's always, when I hear these things, I like to listen to the people who are advocating, who know that specific domain. And if that's the group of people advocating for its use and they're telling you, like, that it's gonna be very useful for us, then we have to figure out how to kind of put it in a sandbox so that they can use it rather than the power dynamic we have right now, right? I also talk sometimes about, like, it's about like power, right? Right now, a lot of individuals have cell phones, and so they're recording what's going on, right? And so that's, I think, has in large part a reason why, like, a lot of people are seeing what's going on, right? Because it's not just the police's narrative, it's that a lot of people are videotaping. Whereas with this kind of technology, that's not what's happening right now. It's that, like, one group of people that has power over many other groups of people is using it. But I'm not, again, advocating for its democratization, as they say, because people are talking about like Clearview AI or something, where I'm just sitting at a cafe and you can just, stalk me or do whatever you want, right? So, yeah, so I really don't have like a single, thing to tell you, but that's sort of how I try to develop my intuition for it.
So if I could tell me if this is a correct paraphrase. If we're going to introduce, even in a research context or in a legislative context, the stakeholder has to be the one who introduces it.
I would say, yeah, or just get the. I would say, you definitely have to get buy-in from them, and their voice should also be heard for, as well. I don't know if I would go so far to say this, they have to introduce it, but the concept, I think, has to be something that they really, really think is very important for them, I think.
Thank you.
I guess, Robert?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just want to mention as a data point, there was a project at CMU where they used like user videos that were taken during the Maidan protests to help, I forget if it was the new government of the Ukraine or the UN or someone, to identify who was shooting the protesters, right?
Oh,
so
wow.
there's an example, at least, of a positive use. I think most people would agree. It was some NGO or the new government of Ukraine, I forget which one. So just as a data point.
There's this also, I don't know if you guys know about forensic, I don't know, I forgot what it's called. Forensic something. I'm sure you'll find it. It's from the, NYU. So my friend Anju, who's also a computer vision researcher, she's a professor at Berkeley, was the one showing me. And so they were using, they were identifying like tear gas canisters that were being used in many different locations to identify like which companies and things like this, And so it was, again, the flipped use that we don't see. And I like seeing things like that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Maybe chance for last question.
Yeah, so last week I was a part of a talk which also talked about like the computational social sciences. So I think what we discussed in that, and that probably applies here, is that we could make a lot of advances in AI I mean, as an isolated concept. But then when it comes to like social sciences, there are some other things that need to progress in that research before we can combine. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think if we have that issue resolved, then you should be able to solve these problems better with a more uniform?
I would say that, well, I don't, from the social scientists I talk to, I mean, I'm not a social scientist, so I can't say about the research that, I'm sure there's like lots of open research questions there, that there's already things that they've done and things that they've worked on that can be incorporated many times. So like Ruha Benjamin talks about this, even we are in our team hired the first social scientist to be a research scientist at Google because we thought it was crucial for whatever we're doing to have that perspective and that way of thinking. So, and I think it's actually like a paradigm problem. It's weird. In computer science, I was talking to someone about this earlier, where like, you know, it's this gatekeeping mechanism, you know, it's really funny, right? Like the mathematicians, I guess at MIT, there's no stats department, right? Because the mathematicians thought stats was not hardcore enough or whatever. And then like, the statisticians and machine learning was like, okay, what's, and then there's like computer science. Well, is it a science? Is it an engineering? What's real computer science? Then it's like, this thing you're doing, oh, it's not really technical, but it's, that, I think that's limiting for us actually. And so if we just, focused on the impact we're trying to make, I think we would make a lot more progress. So that's my 2 cents on that. I'm pretty sure there's open research questions in social science, but there's definitely books they've written and lines of thinking they've had and analysis they've had that we could use. And same with history, same with anthropology, same with many other disciplines.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers my question.
All right. We should thank the speaker. Thank you, Timnit, for giving us wonderful time and enlightening us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Oh, Alex, I didn't see. Okay. Bye.
Thanks.